The snow had come early that year, thick and heavy, falling like sifted flour from the sky's gray belly. It blanketed the land in silence, muffling hooves, wind, and memory alike. The plains of Wyoming stretched in every direction, a sea of white broken only by the skeletal reach of cottonwoods and the trembling breath of old barns. In that hush of a world, a man named Emery Cade walked the edge of survival and the edge of himself. He was not young, not yet old, somewhere in that strange space where time creases the eyes but not the hands. His face was weathered, not cruel, marked by years of wind, loss, and work. His cabin sat low against a hill like a man trying not to be noticed. Smoke from its chimney curled slowly into the pale air. Inside, a dog named Birch stirred only when Emery returned from the woods, boots crusted with snow, silence clinging to him like a second coat. The death of his wife, Miriam, had stolen the color from his world. 3 winters passed, and still he moved as though the air was too thick to breathe. He worked the land because the land didn't ask questions. The cattle were gone, the fences half-built, but the woodpile was tall and the roof sound, and that, he told himself, was enough. He spoke little, not because he couldn't, but because there was no one left to listen. This morning, though, was different. The wind carried the scent before the sky betrayed it. Smoke, bitter and wrong, the kind that doesn't rise from a hearth. Emery paused, hand on the reins of his mule, eyes narrowed toward the horizon. In the north, a dark smear smeared the sky where it should have been pearl and frost. A wagon train, maybe, or what remained of one. His mule shifted under him, uneasy. Emery clicked his tongue and moved on, following the trail that wound through the birch woods, every step a whisper in the snow. He had no debt to settle with anyone, no reason to ride toward fire. But something beneath his ribs stirred, a dull throb that memory alone could not explain. By the time he reached the valley, the smoke had thinned, but the wreckage told its story. 3 wagons, burned down to their bones. Ash fluttered in the wind like dead feathers. One body lay sprawled, half covered in snow. Another slumped against a wheel, hands blackened and stiff. A woman's scarf, bright crimson, fluttered from a splintered post like a signal or a wound. He moved slowly, rifle in hand, eyes scanning for movement, for survivors or shadows. The Comanche had likely moved on, quick as fire and just as unforgiving. No sense in chasing ghosts. But then, he heard it. A sound so soft it could have been the wind's trickery. A cough. Weak. Human. Emery dropped to a crouch, following the sound to a fallen log near the brush line. She was there. Curled like a child, face bruised, lips blue, hair tangled with ice. Her dress was scorched on one side. A torn glove clung to her hand. He thought, for a breath, she might be dead. But then her eyes opened, gray like a storm just off the coast, full of a kind of fear he hadn't seen in years. She did not speak. She only looked at him, as if unsure whether he was real or one more shadow in a world gone cold. "You hurt?" he asked, voice low, steady. She blinked once. Tried to rise. Failed. He slipped his arms beneath her with a practiced gentleness. She weighed little, less than she should. The dog trotted from the woods behind him, whining softly. Emery glanced at the burnt wagons, then at her. "Let's go," he muttered to neither of them. Back at the cabin, the fire roared high. He'd banked it before leaving, not knowing he'd return with more than kindling. He laid her gently on the cot near the stove, covered her in wool, gave her water in slow sips. She shivered through the first hour, teeth chattering, eyes closed tight. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. There were too many answers neither of them were ready to offer. She woke fully by evening. Spoke little, voice soft and clipped. Her accent was foreign, not just to these plains, but to this land. She said her name was Isla Hoffman, a widow, traveling west with family to start again. Raiders had come without warning. She'd run, hidden, prayed. Emery listened, nodded when needed, didn't press. Not because he believed her, something about the way she said her name, like it didn't belong to her, but because he understood the need to protect the past from the present. The dog curled beside her cot. She stroked its fur absent-mindedly, eyes unfocused. He made stew. Thick, simple. She ate slowly, spoon trembling. "You live alone?" she asked finally. "I do." "Long?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Long enough." She didn't ask more. That night, he sat in the chair by the fire, boots off, eyes half-lidded. She slept in the cot, face turned to the wall. Snow tapped the windows like a child begging entrance. Birch snored softly between them. Outside, the world turned quiet again. But inside, something had shifted. She stayed through the next day. And the next. She tried to help, rising from the cot though her body begged her not to. She swept the floors, wiped down the stove. Emery watched her with a strange reverence, like a man who hadn't seen a storm break in so long he'd forgotten what color the sky became afterward. She was not soft in the way some women were. Her fingers were pale but calloused, her gaze steady but kind. When she spoke, her voice held a gravity that betrayed education, history, and careful restraint. One evening, as he chopped wood outside, she stepped onto the porch. The wind tugged her dress and flushed her cheeks. "You saved me," she said. He paused, looked up from the log. "Did what needed doin'." She tilted her head. "Why?" He looked past her, to the hills now bathed in dusklight. His voice was quiet. "Could have been my wife once. Could have been anybody. Just seemed wrong to leave you there." Her face softened, not into a smile, but something gentler, like frost beginning to melt under a tentative sun. Inside, the fire burned down low. The cabin breathed with warmth, with life again. That night, she slept deeper. Emery stood outside long after the stars came out. He looked up at them like they might answer something. The kind of man who didn't wish often, because he'd learned not to expect wishes to land. But tonight, he let himself feel the small ache of possibility. Somewhere in the vast dark sky, a baroness with a false name lay sleeping in a cabin built by grief. And a widower, who'd sworn never to let the world back in, found himself listening to the sound of her breath. Steady now, like hope waking for the first time in years. And though he didn't know it yet, that breath would change everything. Morning broke not with brilliance, but with a dull, gray hush that pressed against the windows like a held breath. Snow still fell in slow spirals, not fierce, but persistent, a soft reminder that winter had no intention of loosening its grip. Inside the cabin, warmth pulsed from the cast-iron stove, filling the room with the scent of pine smoke and simmering oats. The woman, Isla, if that was truly her name, sat wrapped in a wool shawl, spoon in hand, her face less pale than it had been, but far from well. Emery moved with quiet purpose, adding more wood to the fire, checking the door latch, pouring hot water into a chipped basin. His presence was like gravity, silent, solid, inescapable. He said little, but nothing in his silence was unkind. It was the silence of a man who had long made peace with being alone, who no longer expected conversation to be currency. "You don't ask much," Isla said softly, setting her bowl aside. Her voice still carried that elegant tension, as though trained not to tremble, but her eyes gave her away. They searched for something stable, something that wouldn't vanish like everything else had. Emery looked up from his chair, rubbed his hands together slowly. "Figured you'd talk when you were ready." She gave a faint nod, then looked to the window, where snow clung thick to the corners of the glass. "I don't know what to do next." "Rest," he said simply. "Eat. Mend." "I didn't mean just now." "I did." He returned to his task. A piece of leather torn at the edge, mended slowly with thick thread and careful hands. Isla watched him for a while. There was a stillness to him, not born of laziness or reluctance, but of deliberation. Like everything he did had weight. She had grown up in a world where men moved like storms, loud, rushed, destructive in their certainties. Emery was different. He moved like a tree might grow, slow, firm, and without need of permission. That afternoon, she tried sweeping again. The motion hurt, her side still tender from the fall, but she did it anyway. Emery didn't stop her, though he watched her movements closely, like a man who'd known too much loss to let injury sneak in unnoticed. By dusk, they sat across from one another at the table. The meal was simple: beans, salt pork, dark bread hard enough to crack a tooth if you weren't careful. Emery passed her the tin mug of coffee without a word. She took it with both hands. "My family used to drink tea," she murmured. "Silver teapots. Always had lemon, never cream." He raised an eyebrow. "Can't say I've tasted either." She smiled faintly, not in amusement, but in memory. "This is better, somehow. More honest." He didn't reply, but something in the corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, but something close. She wondered how long it had been since anyone had looked him in the eye without expectation. Later that evening, she wandered the cabin with slow steps. It was small but carefully kept. A few carvings on a shelf, a horse, a mountain lion, a bird with wings spread mid-flight. All made from the same pale wood. Birch, likely. There were no photographs. Just a single yellowing piece of embroidery framed in wood above the hearth. It read, "Even winter has its quiet songs." "That hers?" she asked gently, pointing to the embroidery. Emery nodded without looking up from his book. "Miriam. My wife. I'm sorry." He closed the book, thumb holding the place. "She made peace with things quicker than I did." That line was hers. Said it the night before she passed. Isla lowered her gaze. "It's beautiful." "She was," he said, and then left it at that. In the following days, she began to heal, both in body and manner. The tremble in her hands lessened. Her voice steadied. Still, she kept her true name buried like a coin beneath snow. There was safety in being Isla. Baroness Isolde von Hohenberg had no place here among ash and wood smoke. They fell into a rhythm, unspoken but shared. She mended clothes. He hunted rabbits. She cleaned the stovepipe while he salted venison strips by the back door. Each task a small conversation, each moment of eye contact a question neither asked aloud. Emery showed her how to stack wood properly, bark side out, tight like teeth. When she dropped a log on her boot and cursed under her breath in German, he didn't flinch. Just said, "That your home tongue?" She paused. "It was. Don't hear it often round here." "I don't say it often anymore." He nodded, accepting the answer without prying. Later that evening, as they sat by the fire, the dog at their feet and snow drifting thick past the windows, Emery said, "What did you do before?" "Before what?" "Before everything changed." She stirred the tea he'd made from dried mint leaves. "I listened. I smiled when I didn't want to. I sat in rooms filled with men who talked about borders and horses and oil while pretending I wasn't there. And I danced." "Sounds exhausting." She laughed softly. "It was. You." He tilted his head. "Built this place. Fenced in 30 acres. Raised cattle, until the sickness came through. Buried a dog. Then a wife. Then the rest just blurred. For a while, they let the silence return. But it no longer felt sharp. It rested between them like a shared coat against the cold. One morning, a figure appeared along the trail from town. Old Mason, wrapped in buffalo hide, riding a mule that looked older than its rider. He carried supplies, letters from the post, and a look that said he didn't miss much. Mason stepped into the cabin and immediately turned toward Isla. "Well now," he said in that gravel-dusted voice, "either Emery's taken up carving angels or I've walked into a dream." She smiled, extending a hand. "Isla." "Pleasure, miss. I'm Mason. Known Emery here since he had fewer scars and more cows." Emery chuckled once, rare and warm. They sat for coffee, and Mason filled the space with stories and half-lies, most of which made Isla smile. As he left, he tipped his hat toward her and said to Emery with a wink, "Glad to see the hearth lit again." That night, Emery carved another bird. His hands moved slowly, carefully, smoothing the wings until they looked ready to lift. He didn't say it was for her, but she found it on her cot the next morning, resting on a folded scrap of linen. The shape was imperfect but tender, the beak slightly crooked, the feathers traced with patience. She held it for a long time, then placed it on the windowsill, facing east. Emery came in from the cold, carrying a rabbit and the smell of frost. He glanced at the windowsill, then at her. She nodded once. Outside, the wind picked up. A flurry danced past the window. The season wasn't easing, not yet. But inside the cabin, the cold had begun to shift. Not gone, but gentler. Isla stirred the stew, the wooden spoon turning in lazy circles. "You think the snow ever really leaves?" Emery sat by the fire, stretching his hands out to the warmth. "No. But it stops meaning the same thing." She didn't ask what he meant. She understood. Loss didn't melt. It just changed shape. When she turned, he was watching her, not with hunger or pity, but with something quieter. Recognition, maybe. Or respect. She smiled, soft and unsure. And for the first time in many years, Emery smiled back. The storm rolled in as though summoned from memory. Gray clouds coiling over the ridgeline, shadows deepening with every hour. Snow returned, not in gentle flurries but in great swathes, whipping sideways across the valley, erasing tracks and silencing the trees. The wind keened through the branches like a grieving voice, a sound that seemed to crawl inside the walls of Emery Cade's cabin and settle in the corners. He had felt it coming before it appeared. A tightness in his knees. The kind of ache that tells a man the sky is about to break. By noon, the trail to town had vanished beneath white drifts, and by evening, even the window panes were frosted with thick veils that blurred the world outside to nothing. They were snowed in. Inside, the cabin crackled with warmth, the stove fed to a red glow, the walls lined with shadows that flickered like dancers. Emery and Isla moved carefully through the hours, navigating around each other with a quiet understanding. The storm had sealed them together like ink to parchment. She sat cross-legged near the hearth, a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, a tin cup of steeped herbs cradled between her palms. Her eyes were darker than usual. Rested, yes, but distant in a way that said the past was stirring behind them. Emery sat across from her, sharpening a blade with slow, methodical strokes. The only sounds were the rasp of metal, the hush of the wind, and the occasional pop of burning pine. She spoke first. Her voice was even, as if she were reading from a book she had memorized long ago. "My real name isn't Isla." Emery paused. The blade in his hand stilled mid-stroke. He didn't look up right away, just set the knife aside and leaned forward to feed another log to the fire. "I figured," he said quietly. She blinked, caught off guard. "You did." "I'm not a fool," he murmured, settling back into his chair. "A woman like you doesn't end up out here without reason. The way you talk, the way you hold yourself. You've been around things I haven't." She let out a breath that was half relief, half sorrow. "I thought I'd buried it all." "Maybe you did. But the ground's shallow when the wind kicks up." She stared into the flames for a long moment, watching them lick the iron grate. Then she began again, softer now. "My name is Isolde. Isolde von Hohenberg." He didn't flinch, only nodded once. "I was born to a world where names came before souls, where titles meant more than kindness. My father was a baron. My mother a count's daughter. We lived in a house with mirrors on every wall, chandeliers that never collected dust, servants who bowed more than they breathed. I was dressed in silks I didn't choose, taught languages I would never speak to those who mattered. And I was told that one day I would marry power. Not love, power." The fire cracked loudly, as if punctuating her words. "I tried to escape it once. I was 17. I hid in the stables, rode out past the orchards until the sky went black. They found me by morning and said nothing, but after that I was watched. My meals were counted, my letters read. And when I turned 20, they told me I was to be sent to a man twice my age, a duke in Prussia, who'd promised land in exchange for a fertile wife." She sipped from the cup, but it trembled now. "So I ran again. This time farther. I took a ship, disguised myself, used a servant's name, paid men to forget me. I thought if I could just reach the West, where no one cared who I was, I could start as someone else." "And you almost did," Emery said, his voice a whisper, like a leaf turned over by wind. Her eyes found him. I don't expect forgiveness. Not for the lies. But I didn't want to be rescued as someone I'm not. He shook his head. You were someone worth saving, no matter the name. That silenced her more deeply than shame. Her hands fell to her lap, still holding the empty cup, her fingers curled tightly around the handle. She looked down. And you? What's left of you that hasn't been carved away? He smiled then, faint and worn. Not much. A name. A dog. A few fence posts. Tell me about her, Isolde said. Your wife. He exhaled, long and slow, like he'd been waiting to be asked for years. Then he began. She was small, wild, in her way. Miriam. Laughed at everything. At the birds, at my clumsy boots, at how I'd burn coffee no matter how careful I was. She grew up in Tennessee but had eyes like she came from oceans. She wanted to see everything, but never made it past these hills. Said the sky here was wide enough. What happened? He looked into the flames. Winter. Fever. Came on fast, like a storm behind the eyes. One day she was laughing at the dog chewing her boot, and the next she couldn't stand. I sat by her bed until she stopped breathing. She never made a sound. Just faded. Isolde reached across the space between them, her fingers brushing his wrist. Not a grip. Not a plea. Just presence. Human warmth meeting another. I'm sorry, she whispered. So am I, he said. Still am. They sat there, firelight casting long shadows up their faces, eyes lit not just by flame but by shared understanding. Outside, the wind shrieked and moaned, but the cabin held. Later that night, when sleep came for her, Isolde dreamed of staircases made of smoke and voices calling her by names she no longer wanted. She woke with a gasp, hand clutching her chest, and found Emery still at the fire, carving a piece of wood she hadn't seen before. A bird, he said without looking up. Don't know why. Just came to me. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. He didn't move away. She watched his hands work the blade over the grain, slow, careful. You carve like you're healing something, she said. Maybe I am. Do you believe people can start over? He stopped, turned the piece of wood in his palm. I don't know, he said. But I think we can choose better, second time around. She nodded, then leaned her head gently against his shoulder. They sat that way until dawn teased the edges of the sky. In the days that followed, they settled into a silence that was no longer guarded. She told him about the gardens back home, where nothing grew wild. He told her about the hills where he first kissed Miriam, too shy to meet her eyes. She laughed at that, not cruelly, but with a warmth that made him laugh too. One evening, she found a fiddle in a trunk under his bed. It was old, missing a string, the wood dulled from years untouched. She held it gently, running her fingers across its ribs. You play. Used to. Will you? He shook his head. Not anymore. Why not? Because she did. Isolde didn't push. She only nodded and set it back in the trunk, as if tucking away a memory not hers to disturb. But that night, as the fire dwindled to embers, she heard it. Faint at first, a low hum, a single trembling note. Then another. Emery, seated by the stove, fiddle tucked awkwardly under his chin, bow trembling as it moved. The sound was cracked, hesitant, but true. She didn't speak, just watched. When he finished, he looked up, eyes shining in the low light. I thought I forgot, he said. You didn't, she replied. You just hadn't remembered in a while. The storm broke the next morning. The sky split into 1,000 shades of blue, the clouds retreating like a tide drawn back. Snow still blanketed the ground, but the wind had calmed, and the world gleamed as if made new. They stepped outside together, boots crunching softly beneath them. The trees sparkled with frost, and the hills glowed under the soft morning sun. Emery turned toward her, one hand resting on the porch post, the other tucked into his coat. What now? He asked. She looked out over the snow-silvered land, hair glinting in the pale light. I think, she said, we keep waking up. one day at a time. He nodded, and as they stood there, shoulder to shoulder in the still morning, a kind of peace settled over them. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of being known and not turning away. And somewhere inside that silence, a future began to hum. The days lengthened just enough to hint at the coming thaw, though winter still held the land in its crooked fingers. Snow melted along the eaves, dripping rhythmically, the sound like a slow clock ticking inside Emery's chest. In the cabin, warmth had grown beyond the fire. Something lived in the way he and Isolde moved now. Not hurried, not uncertain. Just side by side, as though the house had finally settled around two instead of one. They worked with a silent rhythm that made the smallest tasks feel like something sacred. She swept the floors with careful attention. He mended tools with quiet purpose. They shared coffee in the early hours before the sun reached over the hills. Spoke little but looked often. The silence between them no longer demanded to be filled. It held meaning of its own. But even in that peace, there was an undercurrent. A feeling, not yet named, but coiling in the shadows just beyond the walls. It arrived on horseback. The man came from the west, his coat dusted with road and his hat pulled low. He rode a black gelding with a white blaze across its nose and wore the kind of look that didn't ask questions because it already knew answers. He came into Stillwater quietly, took a room at the tavern, drank nothing, and spent his hours reading folded paper by the fire. His name was Martin Eckhart. He was not a sheriff or a bounty hunter in title, but he had the air of both. Men like him didn't ask for justice. They arrived already believing it was theirs to deliver. He carried no badge, but the revolver on his hip was well-oiled, and the boots he wore had walked further than most horses ever had. It wasn't long before he asked after a woman. Said she was traveling with a small party east of the Rockies, possibly under another name. European. Well-spoken. Missing, not by accident. The barkeep, always one to lean toward a good story, told him of a snowbound widow taken in by a local settler. Keeps to himself, the man said. Lost his wife some time back. Hard man, fair heart. Got a cabin out near Pike Ridge. Eckhart nodded once. Said thank you. Left a coin on the counter like it was a gravestone. 2 days later, Emery found the man waiting outside the general store, horse tied neatly to the post, coat collar turned high. He stepped into Emery's path as naturally as breath, offered a nod, then a question wrapped in pleasantry. You Emery Cade? Emery studied him a long moment. I am. You got a woman up in that cabin with you? That your business? The man smiled without warmth. Name's Martin Eckhart. I've been paid to find someone. Her family worries she's taken up with trouble. They say she might be using another name. Emery didn't blink. If I had a woman in my house, that'd be because she chose to be there. Eckhart's smile remained, but his eyes cooled. You tell her a man came by, then. You tell her the world's looking for her. Emery didn't reply. He stepped past him without further word, but his shoulders were tight, and his jaw set hard. Back at the cabin, he found her in the yard, stacking wood with her sleeves rolled. The snow had thinned around the house, revealing patches of earth like old wounds. She looked up as he approached and saw it on his face before he spoke. What is it? Someone came looking, he said. Asking about you. Her hands dropped to her sides. The blood drained from her face. Who? Called himself Eckhart. Said he was sent by your family. She swallowed hard, her breath catching. Did he say my name? No, Emery said. But he didn't need to. The way he spoke, he knew. He'll come again. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she turned and walked toward the porch, sitting down on the top step with her arms wrapped around her knees. I can't go back, she said. You have to understand that. I do. They'll turn me into something I'm not. Again. That life. It's not a life. It's a cage built from gold. He sat beside her. The dog wandered up, rested its head on Isolde's knee. What do you want to do? He asked. She looked at the horizon. Run, maybe. Head south. Cross into New Mexico. Start again. Again. Emery was quiet. Then he said, "You won't have to do it alone." That night, they packed quietly, gathering food, tools, spare boots, and blankets. Emery fetched the old saddle from the barn and tested the cinch with practiced hands. Isolde folded her few belongings, a comb, a scarf, the carved bird he had made, and placed them in a canvas bag. By lamplight, she traced the edge of a folded map, her finger moving along trails she had never traveled. She paused over a name, Stillwater Ridge. "There's a canyon pass," she whispered. "We could be across by tomorrow if we leave early." He nodded. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said, "What if we didn't run?" She looked at him. "What if we faced him? Told him you're not going anywhere unless it's your choosing?" She hesitated. "And if he doesn't care?" Emery's eyes didn't waver. "Then he'll learn he's not the only one who can stand his ground." The next morning, they woke before dawn. Snow still clung to the trees in hard patches, but the wind had shifted. The first breath of spring lingered faintly on the air. They were ready to leave when they heard the hoofbeats. Eckhart came alone, just as before, but this time he did not stop at the porch. He rode up with the confidence of a man who'd already made his decision. Isolde stepped out before Emery could speak. Her coat hung open, her hair tied back in a rough knot, eyes clear and steady. "I'm not going with you," she said. Eckhart looked her over with the calm disdain of a man studying a cracked statue. "I've been paid to bring you back. Alive. Not happy. You can tell them I died," she said. "That would be close enough to the truth." He dismounted. Emery stepped forward, hand resting loosely at his side. "You'll leave now," Emery said, "or you'll regret staying." Eckhart didn't reach for his gun. Not yet. But he smiled again, that same smile, cold and controlled. "You'd raise arms against the law?" "There's no law here," Emery replied. "Just men. And their choices." For a moment, it seemed it might come to violence. The wind held its breath. Even the birds fell quiet. Then Eckhart spat into the snow and turned away. "I'll return," he said. "You think hiding here makes you free? There's always someone willing to trade you back." He mounted his horse, eyes on Emery. "One day, you'll have to choose what matters most." "I already have," Emery said. And with that, Eckhart rode off into the trees. They didn't speak for a while after he vanished. Isolde stood motionless until her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the porch. Emery stood beside her, the rifle unused but ready. Eventually, she said, "You could have let me go. You didn't have to stand with me." "I didn't have to," he said. "But I wanted to." She looked up at him, her eyes full of questions that had no answers yet. "I'm not who I was," she whispered. He sat beside her, hand brushing lightly against hers. "Neither am I." Night fell early, cloaking the cabin in darkness. The fire inside glowed steady and warm, untouched by the chill outside. The map still lay open on the table, trails winding toward places unknown. They hadn't left. Not yet. But they were no longer hiding. Emery sharpened his knife slowly, methodically. The sound echoed through the room like a heartbeat. Isolde stood at the window, watching stars emerge one by one in the sky. "When we leave," she said, "I want to choose the road, not flee it." He nodded. "We will." The dog stretched and curled back into sleep by the hearth. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, no longer howling, just whispering, like it knew change had already begun. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a path waited, one that would not be easy, but would be theirs alone. The morning they left, the sky was the color of steel, unmoving, unblinking, a great ceiling pressing low over the land. They rose before the sun, packed their things in silence, and saddled the horses with slow, practiced hands. Birch whined once, sensing the change, pacing the porch as Emery cinched the last strap. Isolde stood with the map folded in her gloved hand, her face unreadable but pale with resolve. The cabin sat behind them like an old friend watching their backs. Emery didn't look over his shoulder as they set out. He'd said his goodbye in the way he'd banked the fire for the last time, in the careful way he'd closed the door without slamming it. The path ahead was narrow, winding through snow-laced pine, leading toward the canyon trail that would drop them south, toward Stillwater Ridge and the roads that branched out like veins into the territories beyond. They did not speak much as they rode. The air was sharp, biting at their cheeks. The wind moved in soft hushes, curling around trees like it was trying to listen. Isolde sat straight in her saddle, her eyes forward, her hands steady. She did not look back either. Whatever waited behind her had been left there with her name and the life it carried. By mid-morning, they reached the ridgeline. The view opened like a wound, miles of white stretching into distant gold hills, the far south glimpsed as a thread of color against the horizon. The pass below coiled between jagged stone and dark trees, narrow and treacherous, but open. If they could reach the canyon floor before nightfall, they'd be safe. Emery slowed his horse. Isolde pulled alongside him. "You sure about this?" he asked, voice quiet as falling snow. She met his eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything." He nodded once. That was all. But something in the air shifted then. A sound. A silence too sudden. Birch's ears perked, and he gave a low growl from where he trotted behind. Emery's hand went instinctively to the rifle strapped across his saddle. Then came the movement. 3 riders, emerging from the tree line to the west, their forms like ink stains against the pale snow. They moved fast, tight formation, trained. Not wild Comanche or scattered raiders. These were professionals. One of them raised a hand. Martin Eckhart. He wore the same calm expression as before, but there was no smile this time, only precision. His coat billowed slightly with his pace. The 2 men flanking him rode with rifles drawn. Emery muttered under his breath. "They followed us." Isolde's jaw clenched. He said he would. They had no time to turn back. The slope down into the canyon was steep but passable, if they could reach it first. Emery wheeled his horse. "Go." Isolde hesitated. "Now," he barked, and she spurred forward, her horse lunging into motion. The path was narrow, rocks jutting out at cruel angles, patches of snow crusted over black ice. Emery rode behind her, close, scanning the ridge above for movement. Eckhart's men split, one cutting to the right, trying to flank. The other stayed behind him, rifles swinging into place. A shot rang out. Snow exploded to Emery's left, bark splintering from a tree. He didn't return fire. Not yet. Not until he could draw them farther down, away from the ridge. The path turned sharp, and he called out to Isolde, "To the ravine, take the narrow cut. You remember it." She didn't answer, but she veered left at the next split, ducking under a low branch, the sound of hooves hammering the earth behind her. The wind screamed as it funneled through the pass, howling against stone. Another shot, closer this time. Her horse reared but kept steady. Emery swung his rifle up, fired once, clean, controlled. The man behind him yelped, slid from his saddle, his body hitting the snow like a felled deer. Eckhart kept coming. He didn't shoot. Not yet. He was saving something. Waiting. They reached the bottom of the ravine just as the sun crested the edge of the world, bathing the canyon floor in gold and shadow. The trees grew denser here, pines rising like cathedral columns on either side. The snow thinned, revealing patches of earth, and their pace quickened. Isolde rode like she was born to it, her hair streaming behind her, the scarf at her neck fluttering wildly. Emery could see the tight set of her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the reins, not afraid but focused, determined. Then a cry, a sharp bark from the trail behind. Birch. Followed by a thud. Emery pulled up hard. Birch lay on the side of the trail, limp, a smear of red on the snow. One of Eckhart's men, the one who'd flanked, stood over him, raising his gun toward Emery. Before he could pull the trigger, Emery fired. The man dropped. His rifle clattered to stone. Emery dropped from his horse, slid to the dog's side. Birch was breathing, but barely. His eyes opened, saw Emery, and gave a faint whine. "I'm sorry, old boy," Emery whispered, his hand trembling as it pressed over the wound. You did good. You always did. Behind him, hooves again. One rider. Past. Emery stood. Eckhart rode in, pulling up short a few yards away. His horse snorted steam. He stepped down slowly, methodically, like he was about to make a speech. "You're not going to get away," Eckhart said, tone casual. Emery raised his rifle. "She already has." Eckhart smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "She's a contract, Cade. A well-paid one. You think this is about love or choice? It's about obligation. She belongs. She belongs nowhere but where she chooses to be." Eckhart's smile faltered. "You think dying for her will make her free?" Emery's voice was low. "I'm not dying today." And then, behind Eckhart, hooves again. Isolde. She'd circled back. She didn't yell. She didn't warn. She just rode hard, fast, straight into Eckhart. The horse collided with his side, knocking him off balance. Emery rushed forward. Eckhart rolled, drawing his pistol, firing once, missed. Emery dropped low, swung the butt of his rifle into Eckhart's hand. Bone cracked. The gun skittered into the snow. They fought then, not with honor but with fury. Eckhart was trained, but Emery fought like a man who'd lost too much to lose again. He tackled him into the snow, fists landing hard. Blood spattered. Eckhart reached for a knife. Isolde dismounted, grabbed the gun from the snow, raised it. "Stop," she said. Both men froze. She aimed the weapon, steady hands, steady eyes. She didn't tremble. "You can go back," she told Eckhart. "Alone. You can tell them what you like. But I am done being chased." Eckhart spat blood. "You won't make it. The world out there doesn't want your kind." She didn't blink. "Then I'll make a new world." He looked at her, then at Emery, then laughed once, bitter. "She's not worth dying for." Emery's voice was gravel. "Then it's a good thing I'm not dying." Eckhart lay back in the snow, breath wheezing. "I'll leave. This time. But someone else will come. You can't bury who she is." Isolde stepped forward. "We're not burying it. We're building on it." She turned, walked to Emery, and helped him to his feet. He leaned into her slightly, blood on his lip, ribs aching. "You all right?" she asked. "I'll live," he said, eyes warm with pain and love. "What about Birch?" She swallowed. I think he's gone." Emery's face broke, just a little, but he nodded. "He stayed long enough." Together, they mounted and rode. Eckhart didn't follow. The trail bent south. The wind shifted. The world turned gold around them. They reached Stillwater Ridge by nightfall, just as the first stars blinked into being. The town was quiet, unremarkable, just scattered rooftops and a church steeple leaning slightly west. But it was theirs to walk into, together. They found an old trading post at the edge of town, its windows fogged, its porch sagging. The woman who ran it didn't ask their names, only gave them keys and bread. That night, Emery sat beside the hearth, his shoulder bandaged, a fire flickering low. Isolde curled beside him, head on his chest, her breath soft and even. Neither spoke for a long while. Then she said, "Do you think we're safe now?" Emery looked at the fire. "No," he said honestly. "But I think we're free." She smiled. "That's better." He kissed her forehead. "Tomorrow, we'll get you new papers. A new name." She shook her head. "No. No more names. Just me, this time." And in the quiet that followed, something like peace settled over them. Hard-earned. True. Outside, snow began again, soft this time, gentle. Inside, two hearts beat steady against the dark. And somewhere, in a world that would never truly understand them, they had chosen each other. And that was enough.